Hello, I'm Bob Armstrong. I'm speaking to you today from the Interior Department's museum in Washington, D.C., where you can see behind me some of the artifacts that are from BLM's proud history in this department. This is an important day because I'm going to introduce somebody to you that some of you know, many of you perhaps, who will play a very important part in your life during the next few months and perhaps longer. His name is Mike Dombeck, and he will be the acting director of the Bureau of Land Management for the next few weeks and months. Mike Dombeck was the first person that I met who worked for the department when I came here. He was my acting as Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management. So we have had a working relationship ever since last January when I first walked into Washington. I can tell you, if you don't know him, that he is bright, he is hardworking, he knows more about the department than virtually anybody at his age and stage of life, than anybody that I have run across. But he has good judgment, and he has a great commitment to making this an operation that we can all be proud of. So I am very excited about the fact that he will be the acting director of the Bureau of Land Management. He is my friend. He is very able. Those of us who come as political appointees are only here for a short period of time. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 8. But we're short-timers. It is the people who work here every day that make this operation really go. And I can tell you that there is no finer example of that kind of person that we can all be proud of than Mike. And so it's my privilege to present him to you. And we're starting a long-term relationship that I think will be productive and in the best history and tradition of BLM. Mike Dombeck.
Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate that gracious introduction. I'm honored that Secretary Babbitt and Assistant Secretary Armstrong have asked me to take on the challenging task of heading up the BLM. As some of you know, I most recently served as Bob Armstrong's Chief of Staff. Prior to that, I was Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary and Acting Assistant Secretary. When I told my daughter Mary that I had been named Acting Director of BLM, she asked me, "Can't you hold a job, Dad?" Well, as important as my job with Bob Armstrong may sound, I definitely consider this one to be a bigger challenge. I view this assignment as an opportunity to help Secretary Babbitt achieve his goals while you and I help shape the BLM of the future. We need to make the agency a more satisfying place, and yes, even an enjoyable place to work. Before talking to you about my objectives as acting director, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up with 5 brothers and sisters in the lake country of rural northern Wisconsin. There, I spent 11 summers working as a fishing guide, and I also spent a couple of summers working in the woods, cutting aspen for pulpwood. I received degrees from the University of Wisconsin, the University of Minnesota, and Iowa State. Yeah, you may think I'm a slow learner. You may be right. I've taught sciences at the high school level and fisheries management and zoology at the university level. I've also written quite a few scientific articles, such as the one published in 1987 titled Artificial Turf Incubator for Muskellunge Eggs. For some reason, I haven't yet received a movie offer on that one. As for my professional background, I spent 12 years with the Forest Service, including a stint as National Fisheries Program Manager. I came to the BLM in 1989 as Special Assistant to the Director and later served as the Science Advisor. Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my goals as Acting Director. My principal objective in this new position is to help Secretary Babbitt carry out his rangeland reform, mining law reform, and other initiatives which are aimed at improving the way our nation's public lands are used and managed. This reform effort includes a new emphasis on good science as the Interior Department moves towards ecosystem management. Another top priority of mine is to make the BLM more efficient and effective in the fulfillment of the administration's goal of reinventing government. To me, reinvention means cutting red tape, working smarter rather than harder, and becoming a user-friendly agency for our customers, whether they be ranchers, environmentalists, recreationists, the media, or general public. Another goal is to diversify BLM's workforce. We need to look more like America. As for my style of leadership, let me first say that I will, of course, do some things differently than my predecessor. But I will make every effort to effect these changes in a smooth and orderly way. Having worked at various locations and at all levels of the Forest Service or the BLM, I know where the rubber meets the road, and I really appreciate the challenges you face. Given that perspective, I intend to work very closely with the state directors and their staffs, along with Deputy Director Denise Meredith and the Washington Headquarters Management Team. My management style is direct and open, meaning that I will be straightforward with you, and I will be accessible. In turn, I also expect you to be straightforward and provide me with timely, accurate, and complete information. I really need your very best advice. I promise to listen carefully, and then together, hopefully, we can make the best decisions. And some of these decisions will not be popular, so I really need your full support. In your briefing me on controversial issues in your state, district, or area, tell me who's for it, who's against it, and why. I think it is of the utmost importance to lead by example. I can't expect the state offices to be models of efficiency if my office isn't, so I will do my best to set an example worth following. As a leader, I'm results-oriented rather than process-oriented. My philosophy is, don't tell me, show me. And by that I mean, show me what you're doing. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Now I'd like to say a word about the state of BLM. I'm aware that many of you are experiencing frustration, anxiety, and uncertainty about the future of BLM and your role in the organization. And I understand your feelings because we've been restructuring this agency for 3 years, and the process still isn't complete. While I can't alleviate all of your concerns, please know that I'm working hard to make sure that the reorganization makes sense. It must make sense to the employees of BLM, the customers we serve, and the taxpayers whose dollars we spend. I believe we are at a critical juncture in the future of the BLM. It's a time when we can try to hold on to the ways of the fast-fading past or seize the opportunities of the fast-breaking future. Where I grew up in the frozen north, hockey is a big sport. Some players skate to where the puck is. The best players skate to where the puck will be. Likewise, by making the right moves, we can anticipate the future and move the BLM to the 21st century. In doing this, we can preserve our public lands so that future generations of Americans can use and enjoy them. Thank you. I really look forward to working with all of you.
A word about Jim Baca. Jim Baca is my friend. He is a good man. He has a large, and I think very impressive and very important and very correct view of what these management, Western natural resource and environmental issues are about. We didn't part company because of his views or because of policy differences. We parted company because of stylistic and management differences. And I know it's not easy to sort of accept that those things occur, but they do. This was my decision. It wasn't an easy one. dwell on it at any length, except to say that's what it's about. I say goodbye to Jim as my friend with great affection and the feeling that the wheel turns a lot in public life in these areas, and I suspect that we will see Jim frequently and in perhaps some surprising important roles in the future. Now, I've appointed Mike Dombeck to be acting director. It was an easy decision because I've worked with Mike a whole lot. I didn't just discover him last week. I've worked with him again and again and again over the past year. For reasons I'm still not entirely familiar with, he showed up at the very outset of the discussions over the National Biological Survey and played an intensive role with a small group of people who put the survey on track last spring. He showed up again in my life in the Pacific Northwest, timber summit processing. We worked intensively together. I learned things from him that I hadn't heard from anybody before. I've seen him again in the riparian debate that led to the Packfish program, and now in fuses the Grazing Reform Project and many, many other things. So it was an easy decision. And by asking Mike to step forward, I do two things. One, say to you, I have a great deal of personal confidence in his leadership. Secondly, I know that it sends an important message to a lot of our friends, both in the Bureau and outside. Maitland Sharp said to me yesterday, the head of the Isaac Walton League, he said, by appointing Mike Dombeck, you're making a big decision in sending a real message to the rest of the world. Because he said, Mike Dombeck is one of us. He's one of a generation of people who see the need for reform, remaking, and progress. Now, obviously, what I want most to do is to make certain that we're moving forward on the agenda that we have set out, and that we keep those priorities in mind. I'm not pretending that it's easy. It isn't. These public land issues are really somehow the most controversial of all. If you look back through the history of attempts to reform and reshape public lands policy, grazing, mining in particular, but also the other resource issues, I don't think it comes as any surprise that we're in rough water. That's always the case. The McCarran holiday back in the 1950s, when these issues came up, Senator McCarran responded by terminating the entire budget of the Bureau of Land Management, which may have been the grazing service, for an entire year. Operated with zero budget. There were events back in the 70s, the Sagebrush Rebellion. There's a long history out there. The fact is that we have the moment, we've got to use it. Now, what I'd like to do briefly is tell you where I think we are and where it is we need to proceed on the grazing issue. I think with your help, we're right on target to getting draft regulations out during the first week of March. It's a huge job, but I think it's going right on schedule. Now, obviously, it's a subject that I've been spending a lot of time on. I packed my bags and went west on December 10th, and I have been in the West every single week since December 10th, including Christmas week and New Year's week. Sitting down, bringing people together. 8 meetings in Colorado, I've been in Nevada several times, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, Idaho, and other states. And what I've been doing in all of this time away from here very explicitly and very frankly trying to build consensus. I have settled upon a model in which I have said to all of the interested parties in the West, you want to talk about grazing? We're going to do it in public, and we're going to do it together. The only discussions I'm attending, with one exception in 10 weeks, is discussions which have environmentalists, sportsmen, local officials, and ranchers at the same table, because I'm a believer in the search for consensus, and we can't sort of talk about the search for consensus in the abstract. We've got to do it by sitting down and talking to each other. Now, the risk that I run by doing that is having the search for consensus confused with compromise. And indeed, there's been a fair amount of that, sort of saying, well, this is the traditional sort of movement away from the goals that we formulated by simply cutting everything in half, diluting it, trying to find the lowest common denominator that's acceptable to everybody. That's not what consensus building is about. It isn't just dividing everything by 2 or 3 or 4. It is a process to see if by bringing people together in public, in front of a wide audience, we can create and find the grounds for understanding, because we're past the days when we can simply say, here's a policy, and we're going to find 51% of the votes to put it across in whatever forum and whatever the policy is. This is a kind of post-ideological political time, and change doesn't stick unless it is worked into the fabric of communities and explained to the press and ultimately justified in front of a large, large audience in the West. And doesn't mean we walk away from this process with everybody agreeing. That's kind of what compromise is about. You say, well, justice enough until we sort of basically got agreement on everything. The search for consensus isn't about that. The search for consensus is about explaining, about listening, about making changes where you learn something better or that you didn't previously understand or know about, and all the way along trying to see if we can't really draw people into the process and an understanding of what it is we can do and how. Now, through that process, we will issue regulations which I believe will address and explicate and make a lot of progress on the 6 priorities for rangeland reform that we set out in that document last summer. We set out, I think, if you look at all the proposals, you can boil them down to 6 categories, and I could just go through them very briefly. One is a basic issue of standards and guidelines. By what criteria do we measure, regulate, monitor, and judge progress? The second one is water rights and range improvements. The third is this issue of enforcement of guidelines and permit conditions. Fourth, conservation issues. Fifth, grazing committee and governance, and then lastly, fees. Now, where we are on these and where I will be as we begin the process of pushing them to completion and then moving out across the West to explain them as roughly this. Standards and guidelines, I think we are settling in on a 2-tier process. I believe the final regulations will embody the 4 standards and guidelines that were set out in the Reed Amendment. The overall requirement of moving toward sustainable, balanced, healthy ecosystems. Secondly, making clear that the Endangered Species Act applies on Western Range as well as everywhere else. Third, that the Clean Water Act and all of its criteria must be worked into this process and complied with in the course of our range administration. Fourth, that we will have an explicit goal of riparian restoration and health. Now, beyond that, I'd like to have kind of a fifth category, which says, as a result of this consensus building, we've heard you out west about being overly prescriptive in federal regulations. So we will move on some of these other more detailed issues toward regional standards and guidelines, which will be moved through the state process. We will specify the issues that must be addressed. And if you'd like a preview of those, I would refer all of you to the range management document, which has just come out from the National Research Council. It's pretty tough going, but the issues that have to be addressed in more detail, I think, are very nicely laid out in parts of that. Second issue in these guidelines is water rights and range improvements. Now, I think you're all aware that what we're trying to do there is to move back to the practice of this agency prior to 1982. We ran into a firestorm of criticism about water rights because of the perception the original language in rangeland reform was vague and broad, and buried in it was some sort of other agenda. As a result of the discussions that we've had, particularly in Colorado, we have really clarified and sharpened what it is we're after, which I would summarize to you as follows. What we're after is a clear statement that in the future, water rights developed for rangeland use and stock watering on public lands will be obtained pursuant to state law in the name of the United States, so that those water rights will be wrapped up with the permit, and there won't be any possibility, as there is under the existing BLM policies, of those water rights kind of getting broken off from the permit and heading out as sort of non-public property in some other direction. And I'm very confident that we're zeroing in on a good, precise statement of what the change is and what it's all about. The enforcement issues, we've had a really good discussion about the whole variety of issues here. One problem that was raised is what I would call pesticide on the petunias. And these are legitimate issues we have to deal with. There's a sense of our original document was so broadly worded that a rancher's mother-in-law was sort of gardening and using a forbidden pesticide, which you legitimately obtained somewhere on a petunia bed. That would be a violation of the law, which might trigger revocation of the permit and collapse of the range. But that's obviously pretty far-fetched and pretty absurd. Lawyers and people who write regulations have to deal with people who say, I read your regulation to say that I'm going to lose my ranch if my mother-in-law uses a forbidden pesticide on the petunia. So we're kind of working that to sort of get some specificity. The enforcement issues are going to include a broad mandate for public participation at every level of the adoption of RMPs, of allotment management plans, permit renewal. I think that's a big step forward. We addressed that in rangeland reform, but I think the way we did was kind of scrambled because we got trapped in the affected interest sort of debate with different policies in different states all over about this concept of affected interest. That is, how close do you have to be to the action in order to show up and participate in an RMP allotment plan, a permit renewal. And consensus building process really does yield good results. We came out of the Colorado meeting with a clear agreement from environmentalists, ranchers, and everyone that there ought to be full public participation as a matter of right, always in the formulation of these plans. So we learned something. It's not about the definition of effective interest. It's about abolishing the whole concept and saying these processes are going to be open to the public. And a lot of other technical things that move along with that. But I think all said, as a result of this process, a net plus. Conservation issues is this issue of conservation use. We're going to move that forward in pretty much the form that it came out in range reform. We've learned a great deal more about what the underlying issue is that really arises out of the Mercer litigation out in, and I think we've learned how to kind of define but, you know, that was appropriate 30 or 40 years ago, perhaps. But we can't have a modern rangeland program in which we say to one user group, you have 100% of that committee and the exclusive right to advise the Bureau of Land Management on how the 8,100 range improvement funds are divvied up. We've got to end that, frankly, and up front, because the 8,100 funds are range improvement funds. But if you go back and look at the legislation, it was clearly intended by Congress that range improvement was for various uses, including wildlife and all of the broader benefits. So we continue on a course of scratching the grazing committees. And that takes us back up, of course, to the district advisory councils that we now have and that are, in fact, required by FLIPA. What the regulations are going to do, and this is foreshadowed in range reform, I think we're just going to continue to kind of develop it, is to say we want to do two things with these district advisory committees. First is draft a regulation which says they're going to be truly broad-based. In some places in the West, they have been fairly inclusive, but in a lot of other places, they've been pretty heavily stacked. So the regulation is going to try to say we're going to find a balance between the resource consumption side of multiple use and the public wildlife, sportsman, environmental side, and see if we can draft a regulation that it's a tough job trying to nail this down, but to say that the result is going to be balanced committees which genuinely represent all of the stakeholders out on the public domain. They will also include an invitation to broaden the nominating process. The appointments under law ultimately have to be made by the department. So I think it's very important to tender an invitation to governors and local officials to say, we want these to be really relating to communities, and we want you in on the process, in on the discussion of how those nominations are made. Now, beneath that, in lieu of the old grazing committees, what we are headed toward is authority under these district advisory councils to allow and encourage local, consensus-based rangeland improvement groups to spring up and try to build some consensus. Now, that concept comes out of some successes that have clearly begun to spring up across the West. The Trout Creek Mountain Working Group in Oregon, the Applegate Valley Group in Oregon, the Gunnison Group in Colorado, the Owl Mountain CRM process in Colorado. There are a goodly number of them out there. And our challenge, I think, is to encourage those without sort of stifling. See if we can set up a relationship which says there'll be a lot of spontaneity, a lot of possibility for consensus building without having to publish meeting notices and federal register and all that kind of stuff. Now, underlying this approach is a wager on my part and on the part of the environmental community, on the part of the ranching industry and everyone else, that we can create a kind of different way of looking at these issues. If you characterize the last 60 years as kind of a continuing tension in kind of a two-way relationship between the permittees out on the range and the department, with the department kind of moving up to the top, representing all the other stakeholders and making certain that there's balance, but always in this kind of two-way discussion between us and the rancher. What we're going to do is say, we'll see if we can shift that, and if in fact we can move some of this sort of fine-grained decision-making back toward the local landscape, but only in the context of assuring that all of the stakeholders are present all the time. Now, our wager is that in the West, for the most part, out on the local landscape, there are stakeholders now present, and they certainly weren't 50 or 60 years ago. And that in exchange for kind of moving some of this back, we will require that the stakeholders all be present. And say one more thing, I think is very important, and that is we're ready to listen in the administration of our responsibilities to advisory groups, bearing in mind that they are advisory groups and cannot be more than advisory under federal law. But we're willing to listen. The district manager is willing and ready to listen. The state director is ready and willing to listen. But we're not going to put much weight in advice which comes by virtue of people just voting, so that, if the resource group shows up on Wednesday night with more people, they win 55-45, or the public groups show up and outnumber on a particular night, the advice is 55-45 the other way. That simply perpetuates existing differences. We know all about those differences, and every single range con district manager is well informed about that. What we're going to say is where you can develop consensus, we're going to start listening. Because I think that's the essence of the successes that these local groups have had out there on the landscape. Is when, through a combination of circumstance and necessity and the appearance of people who are particularly interested, they start really ginning this up, where they reach consensus. By definition, something you really ought to be listening to, because the stakeholders have all seen that their interests are furthered together as a condition of being part of the consensus. Now, that's the concept, and it's a very important one. Does it have some risks? Sure. Are there representatives of all stakeholders in every single BLM district in northern Nevada, southern Arizona, western Colorado? Well, some more than others, and we'll have to sort of work through to make sure that that kind of happens. Could communities find consensus which flies in the face of the obvious mandate that we have for balanced, sustainable, healthy ecosystem? Yeah, it's conceivable. But I think we need to sort of have some confidence in the future and understand that in no case do these changes provide an excuse for our advocating our responsibilities as the people in the final analysis of charge with public interest. Lastly is the issue of fees, which I've become moderately familiar with in the last year or so. We're going to have a significant increase, phased in over 3 years. Range reform says 428. Will there be some departure from that fee? That decision decision has not been made, but there will be a significant fee increase, and I would leave you to judge both the basis and the rationale for that. We have labored mightily on this issue of incentive fees. The PREA legislation clearly encourages the department to experiment with incentive fees, and we really haven't done it. It's an enormously complex problem, and my current intention is to put together an incentive fee program. Now, whether or not we can do that in time to have it appear in the rates, or whether or not we're going to have to step aside and say incentive fees will be addressed at some other point, is yet to be seen. It's an infinitely more complex issue than I could have appreciated. We wrestled with it with all of you through the iterations of this. A word about mining. Mining will come together in the conference committee. It's obviously something we have an enormous stake in. And I think our effort on that is going to increase as we are called upon to backstop and back up with information, statistics, case examples, and other forms of information as that process moves forward. Lastly, this issue of ecosystem management. It's a big concept, and I'm especially impressed at the way the concept has started to work its way into the deliberations and the management decisions of this agency. I'm often asked to say, well, ecosystem management is two words, slogan. There's no precise definition. And my response is, I know all of that. But words have power, and they have a way of kind of shaping how we do things. And what's most impressed me is the suggestive power of those two words that it's already working in to kind of integrate and broaden the management mandate that we have, whether it's reaching out across a watershed, looking over the fence of the Forest Service and beginning a process which I think has enormous power of bringing some convergence toward a day when a rancher may see a single permit and a single set of permit conditions and a single range con working across that fence line. It has enormous power in terms of focusing us on the fact that those riparian areas are parts of an ecosystem which extends from Wyoming to the Gulf of Mexico, or from the Snake River to the Pacific Ocean, and sort of enlarging our ability to think about the implications of that. What I want most of all from you is not a celebration of this decision. It's not something that I want to celebrate, or even, what I want from you is just an understanding that these kinds of calls have to be made. And you can debate forever about whether it might have been done differently, whether it might have been a different trajectory. All I need is your understanding that that's what this stuff is about. The buck stops with me. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. I believe I'm right. I want you to know that I made the decision in the best way I knew how, because I genuinely believe that it was in the interest of this department and this agency and our mission. I want you to adopt Mike Dombeck, because I've got a lot riding on his bill. We're going to go out west next week, the week after together, and sort of ride the range and brave the pickets and walk into these rooms and say we're real believers in consensus, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make this work. We've got lots of decisions coming up, and obviously what I need most of all is your continued commitment have some questions, feel free to kind of lay it on me. It can be any better. I just assume kind of tough it out. Yeah.
Do you have a process in mind to find a permanent replacement? Is that the plan?
No, I don't. I really don't. I thought about it a lot. This is the horse. I'm throwing my saddle on him, and we're going to ride. Maybe it's the other way around. I don't know. But I really want you to look to him and treat him as if this is the way that he is and is going to be, because that's the way we're going to make progress. Yeah.
What about efforts we started, such as reorganization and so forth? Do we continue on track?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There are, those are all important and valid things, and I absolutely want to keep moving. There are a lot of obvious decisions that we need to make, and I want to get started on it. There are vacancies in state director offices. I want to start bringing those down right away so we can get moving along. Anybody else? And I won't try to characterize your site. Okay, wherever you are back there.
I understand that there are rumors circulating that it's going to be a rift in BLM. Do you know if that's an accurate rumor?
Rumors that there is going to be a rift in BLM. The answer is no. I will shed blood to prevent any rift in BLM. Now, having gravely answered your question, let me say that an awful lot. That's a reason that Federico Pena and Mike Espy and I were up in Congress 2 days ago. We've got to get buyout authority because without that, we're going to be pushed back into this riffing stuff. And BLM is the last place that I want that to come down. And you may say, well, he's saying that to 6 other agencies, but I want you to know that in my heart and soul, I really mean it. But without that buyout authority, it's going to be a very tough voyage. Now, we'll see what happens. I think we can do it. We've got a target of, Mike and Bob correct me, I think in this fiscal year of 1,350 reductions department-wide. So you can see the magnitude of it. We will keep you scrupulously informed and do everything in our power to stay away from it. Yeah?
I've been hearing a few rumors about the Western Water Policy review, that might get fired up shortly. As you know, it's on a 3-year time frame. Does anything develop on that?
Yeah, I think we're close. It's been awfully slow, and basically it's the usual problem of trying to settle on what the appointments ought to look like. The appointments, to my knowledge, have not been made, or at least not been publicized. Anybody know anything to the contrary? That's the real issue, and I hope we can get on with it real quickly. I appreciate the concern because it's a great opportunity. That was all. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks very much.
Oh, we got more speakers. Okay.
You just thought you were getting that easy. As usual, I'm in the middle. But Mike asked me to come, actually. And I thought I'd take this opportunity first to say a couple of words about Jim Bakken. And the couple of words I want to say is that it would be my wish that you would read his statement that he put out yesterday, if you haven't. I think it's a class statement. I think it is a graceful statement. And I think it would be well for all of us to look at in terms of a guide for what we do in the future. It's my prediction that Tim Baca will make a contribution in the field of the environment from henceforth, and I'll bet you that will happen. I'd like to say a couple of words about Dombeck. Dombeck has always been a driving force. Dombeck has always been a real leader. Dombeck has always been a strong influence, motivating people with unflagging energy. But most of all, Dombeck has been a strong supporter and a great help to her husband, Mike. And I'd like to ask Pat Dombeck to stand. And so you all can see. And let me tell you, that's the truth. And because I have enjoyed knowing her. The first day that I walked in this door, somebody said, here's your acting. And your acting puts a handcuff on you and you're chained together for a long period of time. It was my privilege to then ask Mike, once I was confirmed, though I could have cut loose the cuffs and run him off, to come and be my chief of staff, which he has done. I'm just delighted that we're going to have a chance to work together in this capacity. And I know that he has the capability. I know that he has a lot of friends out here in this room because you watched him work. But I am committed that the kinds of things we need to do together are to follow the path that we have set out on. And that path does not change as a result of changing personnel. That's the Secretary's wish, that's my wish, that's Mike's wish, and I'm just delighted to be able to introduce him to you, the Acting Director of the Bureau of Land Management, Mike Dombeck.
You don't know how tough it is to follow the eloquence of Secretary Babin or the down-home style of Bob Armstrong, so what you see is what you have. And I told Bob not to introduce my wife, Pat, because she deals with people. And if you cross me, she'll deal with you. And I'm afraid she's going to deal with me tonight. I also talked with Jim Baca last night about 5 o'clock yesterday. I wished him well. And the one point that Jim made to me was how good he felt about all of you that have worked so hard in moving the agenda forward, and stressed we just need to keep on doing that. And I'm also just incredibly honored to be asked to do this, sort of an awesome task from where I come from, having grown up in a town 25 miles from a town of 2,500 in the frozen north. And I have several remarks here that I'm going to abbreviate because there's no point in repeating what the Secretary Babin has said. But where I grew up, we played a lot of hockey. I mean, what else do you do when you have 9 months of winter? And some players skate to where the puck was. The real successful players skate to where the puck will be. And that's precisely what we need to do. I want to say a couple of other things, and that's that all of you know that I'm a career employee with a natural resource management background, and I know the capability that all of you have. I've worked at every level of either the Forest Service or BLM. I know where the rubber meets the road. I know the challenges that you face, and we just need to get on with it. You'll have my support. Yesterday, Bob and I met with the assistant directors just very, very briefly, and well, actually it wasn't so brief, was it, Bob? But it wasn't quite as long as this. And I said that I thought it was really important that the pause in leadership in BLM be very brief. Lee Otney said to me later, he said, we don't want to have a pause. We just want it to be a blink. And you know, he's right, and I want this to be just a very, very brief blink, and I want your support to make it a very, very brief blink. The Secretary talked about the big issues we have on the platter, streamlining, the reform issues, implementing concepts of ecosystem management and others. And you know, I know, and you know, that a lot of these things are not brand new. They've been percolating in BLM for a long time. Some of these seeds were planted a few years ago, and we're fortunate to have a secretary to grab onto these things because they're the right thing to do, because they make sense, and we're going to move them forward. The last point that I want to make is we got a lot of big decisions ahead of us. State director vacancies to be filled, other things like that. We're going to move forward with those decisions. The blink is going to be very brief. My philosophy is don't tell me, show me. That's what we intend to do. There are lots of people who depend upon and care about 270 million acres of BLM lands. We need to get on with the job. And my first directive to you all is now let's all go and get to work.